When it comes to synthesizer development, perhaps unfairly, history doesn't remember the early 90s all that fondly. This was a time of full-scale digitalization due to the musician's desire for more realistic and crisper sounds, and the manufacturer's aim of producing more cost-effective, mass-produced gear. With the dawn of more affordable memory chips, manufacturers like Roland were keen to revolutionize the synthesizer technology with sample-based voicing as opposed to wave generation. This allowed for more permutations of sounds from a single unit, as if you wanted to have a brass sound, you could literally start with a sample of a brass instrument and manipulate your sound from there. This was incredibly appealing for those musicians working in TV, film, and the ever-growing computer game market. It meant they could create whole pieces of music with strings, brass, drums, bass, etc., with just one synth. Hence the title of workstation that were given to these sample-based synths that came with a keyboard and a sequencer built in. I picked up one of these workstations recently. It was and still is in a pretty bad way. I have it working and making sounds now, but the buttons have issues and so does the battery, despite replacing it. I can't access its full functionality, but I can explore the sound to see if any of these are still useful today. The workstation I have is the Roland XP-50, which at its core houses the JV synth engine. The first JV variation was the JV-80 released in 1992. This was a keyboard-based instrument that was quickly followed by the JV-1080 rack mount version. The JV-1080 came with hundreds of patches and several rhythm kits. It could also be expanded with up to 4 SR JV-80 expansion cards. The cards tended to focus on specific genres like dance, hip-hop, orchestra, etc., and they can still fetch a fair price today, which is testament to how well they were programmed. Interestingly, the dance card was pulled by Roland due to copyright issues, as it contained bits of previously recorded material. Here's a few of the available expansion boards. The 60s and 70s keyboards are still going for around $300, which is incredible. The JV synth engine is based on patches, where a patch can have up to 4 parts which are called tones. These tones are the equivalent of an oscillator in a traditional synth, but instead of being waveforms, they're samples that can be pure waveforms themselves derived from other synths such as the Jupiter 8, Prophet 5, ARP, Minimoog, etc. Or they can be samples recorded directly from acoustic instruments. These tones can have their own envelope, filters, modulation settings and effects. Inevitably, the presets will remind you a lot of music produced around this era, so the nostalgia levels are high for anyone who grew up during this period. In fact, Kevin Parker of Tame Impala was taken in by the charms of the JV for their album Currents. Having explored analog classics like the Roland Juno 106 and Sequential Circuits Pro 1 to great effect on lonerism, looking for something new, he picked up an old JV 1080. On it, he said, an audiophile would think some of the patches are the cheapest, plasticky sounds, but for me they're so romantically nostalgic because they're the sounds I remember from when I was growing up in the 90s. The sounds that remind me of something I heard on the radio in the car. That's the truest kind of nostalgia I can find. Those plasticky sounds are far more nostalgic and hit a deeper spot for me than hearing a vintage Fender Twin even. Even though they're sort of cheap sounds, they sound deeply fulfilling. There's a lot of that on the album, glistening FM synth, electro rose and digital clav. The nostalgic aspect is understandable, as so many hits of the day and computer games use sounds from the JV series. Games such as Tomb Raider, Metal Gear Solid and Rayman on the original PlayStation contain whole arrangements composed of just JV sounds. While investigating this XP-50, I found a free editor to explore what it could do. I have managed to get things working that smoothly, mostly due to the fact that this XP is not exactly firing on all cylinders. It has allowed me to play around with the tones and create some interesting sounds though. So I think it could be useful not just for Vaporwave or 90s pastiche. Even some of the presets are useful to me, so I think it'll stay in the studio for a while I investigate it further. Roland have released a software version of it via their cloud setup, so you can have access to all these sounds without the dodgy buttons and need for editors. Although I think a big missed opportunity here is the fact it doesn't contain all the expansion cards like the 60s, 70s keyboards or the vintage synths. I definitely would be interested if it did though. In the meantime, I'll enjoy the surprisingly nice pads and string sounds it can create, and make a track with it.